The security guard's hands were rough as he grabbed Emma's wrists, the cold metal of the handcuffs biting into her skin while a crowd of onlookers whispered and pointed. The store manager stood behind the counter with a satisfied smirk, convinced he'd caught a shoplifter red-handed. Emma's face burned with humiliation as customers pulled out their phones to record what they thought was justice being served. She tried to explain, tried to show her receipt, but nobody would listen to the simple grocery store clerk who supposedly didn't belong in their upscale department store. That's when her husband Daniel stepped forward, pulled out his phone, and made a call that would change everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Emma Rodriguez had always believed that honesty and hard work would be enough to navigate through life. At 28, she had built a quiet existence in the small town of Millbrook, working the early morning shift at Pete's Grocery on Elm Street. The job paid just enough to cover her modest one-bedroom apartment above the pharmacy, and while she wasn't living lavishly, she took pride in her independence. Every morning at 5:30, Emma would walk the 6 blocks to work through neighborhoods that still held the sleepy charm of a town that progress had largely forgotten. The grocery store sat at the corner of Elm and Third, its faded green awning and hand-painted sign giving it the kind of authentic character that chain stores could never replicate. Pete Kowalski, the 60-year-old owner, had hired Emma 3 years earlier when she'd moved to Millbrook with nothing but a suitcase and determination to start fresh. The work wasn't glamorous. Emma spent her days stocking shelves, running the register, and dealing with the occasional difficult customer who thought grocery clerks existed solely for their convenience. But she found satisfaction in the routine, in knowing where every item belonged, in remembering regular customers' preferences. Mrs. Henderson always bought the same brand of tea. Tom Martinez picked up energy drinks every Tuesday before his night shift at the factory. These small connections made the job feel meaningful, even when her paycheck barely stretched to cover basic necessities. Emma's wardrobe consisted mainly of practical clothes from discount stores, dark jeans that hid stains, comfortable sneakers for long shifts, and simple sweaters that looked presentable enough for work. She cut her own hair in the bathroom mirror, bought generic brands at the store where she worked, and had never owned anything that could be considered luxury. Her idea of treating herself was buying name-brand shampoo instead of the store brand, and even that felt extravagant. The most expensive thing Emma owned was her grandmother's wedding ring, a simple gold band with a small diamond that she wore on a chain around her neck. Her grandmother had given it to her before passing away, saying it would bring her luck and love someday. Emma often touched it absent-mindedly during difficult moments, finding comfort in the connection to the woman who had raised her after her parents died in a car accident when she was 16. On the Thursday morning that would change everything, Emma was arranging the produce section when she noticed him. He was tall, with dark hair that looked like he'd run his hands through it, wearing faded jeans and a simple gray t-shirt that had seen better days. What caught her attention wasn't his appearance, though. It was the way he was staring at the apples like they held the secrets of the universe. Daniel Martinez looked completely lost, holding a crumpled piece of paper and frowning at the fruit display. Emma watched him pick up different apples, examine them with scientific intensity, then put them back with obvious frustration. After about 5 minutes of this bizarre apple analysis, she decided to approach. "Can I help you find something?" Emma asked, wiping her hands on her apron. Daniel looked up with relief flooding his features. "I hope so. My grandmother asked me to pick up apples for her famous pie, but she just wrote 'the good ones' on the list. I have no idea what that means." Emma smiled, immediately charmed by his obvious affection for his grandmother. "What kind of pie is she making?" "Apple cinnamon. She makes it every year for the church bake sale, and apparently last year's was subpar because my cousin bought the wrong type of apples. Now the family reputation is on the line, and I'm the designated apple procurement specialist." The way he said it with mock seriousness made Emma laugh. "Well, we can't have that. For apple cinnamon pie, you want something that holds its shape when baking, but also has good flavor. These Granny Smiths are tart and firm, and these Honeycrisp will add sweetness. If you mix them, you'll get the perfect balance. Daniel watched as Emma selected apples with practiced efficiency, checking each one for firmness and looking for any soft spots or blemishes. You really know your apples. 3 years of working here teaches you a few things. Plus, I helped my grandmother with her baking when I was younger. What else do you recommend for legendary pie status? Emma found herself enjoying the conversation more than she'd expected. Daniel had an easy way about him, genuinely interested in her advice and making jokes that actually made her laugh. She walked him through the rest of his grandmother's list, suggesting the best brands for each item and sharing little tips about storage and preparation. When they reached the checkout counter, Daniel insisted on going through Emma's line even though 2 other registers were open with no wait. As she rang up her purchases, they continued talking about food, about the town, about the upcoming church bake sale that apparently was serious business in his family. I have to ask, Daniel said as Emma bagged her groceries, do you always give this comprehensive grocery advice, or am I special? Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks. Only for customers facing family pie emergencies. Well, I'm sure I'll have more emergencies. Grocery shopping isn't exactly my strong suit. He left a generous tip in the small jar by the register, something most customers never bothered with, and said goodbye with a warm smile that stayed with Emma for the rest of her shift.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Their third meeting was no coincidence. Daniel appeared at the store on Wednesday afternoon, during Emma's usual break time, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the cafe down the street. I brought reinforcements, he said, offering her one of the cups. Figured you might need caffeine as much as I need grocery guidance. They sat on the bench outside the store, watching the steady flow of small-town life pass by. Emma learned that Daniel worked in construction, that he'd grown up 2 towns over but moved to Millbrook 6 months earlier to help care for his aging grandmother. He was funny and kind, asking about her life with genuine curiosity rather than polite obligation. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel said as they finished their coffee. "Would you maybe want to have dinner with me sometime? Somewhere that doesn't involve me being confused by produce?" Emma's heart did a small flip. She'd been hoping he'd ask, but hadn't dared assume his grocery store visits were about more than actual shopping needs. "I'd like that." Their first real date was at Antonio's, a family-owned Italian restaurant on the outskirts of town where the portions were generous and the atmosphere was cozy rather than fancy. Daniel picked Emma up after her shift and she'd changed into her nicest dress, a simple blue number she'd bought for her cousin's wedding 2 years earlier. Over plates of homemade ravioli and glasses of house wine, Emma discovered that Daniel was even more interesting outside the fluorescent lights of Pete's grocery. He told her about the houses he'd helped build, about his grandmother's stories of the old country, about his plans to eventually start his own construction company. He listened intently when Emma shared her secret dream of maybe opening her own small cafe someday. Somewhere people could gather for good food and genuine conversation. "What's stopping you?" Daniel asked when she mentioned the cafe idea. Emma laughed, but not with humor. "Money, experience, business knowledge, location, pretty much everything you need to start a business. Those are just obstacles. They're not permanent walls." The way he said it, with such quiet confidence, made Emma almost believe it might be possible. Daniel had a gift for making dreams seem achievable rather than foolish. After dinner, they walked through downtown Millbrook, past the closed shops and under the old streetlights that cast everything in a warm, romantic glow. When Daniel took her hand, it felt natural and right, like something they'd been doing for years rather than hours. "I have a confession," Daniel said as they paused in front of the old courthouse. "I actually know quite a bit about groceries. I wasn't really confused about apples or pasta." Emma stopped walking and stared at him. "Are you serious?" "I saw you working one day when I stopped in for milk, and I wanted an excuse to talk to you. The confused customer routine seemed safer than just asking you out cold." Instead of being annoyed, Emma found herself charmed by his honesty. So all those grocery emergencies were fake? Well, the family pie pressure was real, but I could have figured out the apples on my own. They both started laughing, and suddenly Daniel was kissing her under the courthouse streetlight. It was sweet and tentative at first, then deeper as Emma responded by wrapping her arms around his neck. When they broke apart, Emma felt like something fundamental had shifted in her world. Over the following months, Emma and Daniel fell into a comfortable rhythm. He would stop by the grocery store during her breaks, bringing coffee or sometimes lunch from the deli next door. They spent evenings taking long walks, watching movies at the small local theater, or simply sitting on Emma's tiny apartment balcony talking about everything and nothing. Daniel fit seamlessly into Emma's quiet life, but he also expanded it in ways she hadn't expected. He encouraged her to try new things, like the painting class at the community center or the book club at the library. With Daniel's support, Emma started saving a little money each month toward her cafe dream, opening a special account that made the goal feel more concrete. What Emma loved most about Daniel was his genuine interest in her thoughts and opinions. He asked about her day not out of politeness, but because he actually wanted to know. When she shared difficult customers or workplace frustrations, he listened without trying to fix everything. When she shared ideas for her future cafe, he helped her think through logistics and offered encouragement when self-doubt crept in. 6 months into their relationship, Daniel started spending most nights at Emma's apartment. Her small space became their space, filled with his construction boots by the door and his coffee mug in the sink. They developed little routines. Daniel would make breakfast while Emma got ready for work, and she would have dinner waiting when he returned from construction sites. One evening in early spring, as they were cleaning dishes after a particularly successful attempt at homemade pizza, Daniel became unusually quiet. Emma noticed him checking his phone more frequently and seeming distracted during their usual evening walk. "Everything okay?" Emma asked, as they sat on a bench overlooking the small park where they'd had their first real conversation. "Actually," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket, "I have something I want to ask you." Emma's heart stopped as Daniel dropped to one knee beside the bench, pulling out a small velvet box. The ring inside was beautiful, but not ostentatious, a classic solitaire setting with a diamond that caught the park's evening lights. "Emma Rodriguez," Daniel said, his voice slightly shaky with nerves, "you've made me happier than I ever thought possible. You see good in ordinary moments and make every day feel like an adventure. Will you marry me?" Through her tears, Emma managed to say yes several times before Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, and Emma realized later that he must have somehow gotten her ring size from the jeweler when she'd taken her grandmother's ring for cleaning the month before. The proposal was perfect because it was them, simple, heartfelt, and genuine. As they walked home with Emma's new ring catching streetlight, Daniel told her he'd been carrying the ring for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment. He wanted to make sure it felt natural, not forced or overly dramatic. "I'd like it." Their first real date was at Antonio's, a family-owned Italian restaurant on the outskirts of town where the portions were generous and the atmosphere was cozy rather than fancy. Daniel picked Emma up after her shift, and she'd changed into her nicest dress, a simple blue number she'd bought for her cousin's wedding 2 years earlier. Over plates of homemade ravioli and glasses of house wine, Emma discovered that Daniel was even more interesting outside the fluorescent lights of Pete's grocery. He told her about the houses he'd helped build, about his grandmother's stories of the old country, about his plans to eventually start his own construction company. He listened intently when Emma shared her secret dream of maybe opening her own small cafe someday, somewhere people could gather for good food and genuine conversation. "What's stopping you?" Daniel asked when she mentioned the cafe idea. Emma laughed, but not with humor. "Money, experience, business knowledge, location, pretty much everything you need to start a business. Those are just obstacles. They're not permanent walls." The way he said it, with such quiet confidence, made Emma almost believe it might be possible. Daniel had a gift for making dreams seem achievable rather than foolish. After dinner, they walked through downtown Millbrook, past the closed shops and under the old streetlights that cast everything in a warm, romantic glow. When Daniel took her hand, it felt natural and right, like something they'd been doing for years rather than hours. "I have a confession," Daniel said as they paused in front of the old courthouse. "I actually know quite a bit about groceries. I wasn't really confused about apples or pasta." Emma stopped walking and stared at him. "Are you serious?" "I saw you working one day when I stopped in for milk, and I wanted an excuse to talk to you. The confused customer routine seemed safer than just asking you out cold." Instead of being annoyed, Emma found herself charmed by his honesty. So all those grocery emergencies were fake? Well, the family pie pressure was real, but I could have figured out the apples on my own. They both started laughing, and suddenly Daniel was kissing her under the courthouse streetlight. It was sweet and tentative at first, then deeper as Emma responded by wrapping her arms around his neck. When they broke apart, Emma felt like something fundamental had shifted in her world. Over the following months, Emma and Daniel fell into a comfortable rhythm. He would stop by the grocery store during her breaks, bringing coffee or sometimes lunch from the deli next door. They spent evenings taking long walks, watching movies at the small local theater, or simply sitting on Emma's tiny apartment balcony, talking about everything and nothing. Daniel fit seamlessly into Emma's quiet life, but he also expanded it in ways she hadn't expected. He encouraged her to try new things, like the painting class at the community center or the book club at the library. With Daniel's support, Emma started saving a little money each month toward her cafe dream, opening a special account that made the goal feel more concrete. What Emma loved most about Daniel was his genuine interest in her thoughts and opinions. He asked about her day not out of politeness, but because he actually wanted to know. When she shared difficult customers or workplace frustrations, he listened without trying to fix everything. When she shared ideas for her future cafe, he helped her think through logistics and offered encouragement when self-doubt crept. The only shadow on their happiness came from Daniel's family, particularly his mother, Margaret Martinez. When Daniel brought Emma to meet his extended family at his grandmother's house, the reception was noticeably cool. Margaret asked pointed questions about Emma's background, her education, her family's financial situation. She seemed particularly fixated on Emma's job at the grocery store, asking repeatedly if Emma had any plans for advancement. "It's honest work," Emma had said, trying to keep her voice steady under Margaret's scrutiny. "I enjoy helping people and being part of the community." "Of course, dear," Margaret replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sure it's very fulfilling." Daniel's grandmother, Rosa, was warm and welcoming, insisting that Emma call her abuela and sharing family recipes along with embarrassing stories about Daniel's childhood. But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that Margaret saw her as temporary, someone Daniel would eventually outgrow. The tension came to a head during the wedding planning, when Margaret suggested that Emma might want to consider a more suitable dress, offering to take her shopping at an expensive boutique in the city. When Emma politely declined, saying she was happy with her choice, Margaret's disapproval became more obvious. "I just think," Margaret said during a family dinner the month before the wedding, "that some occasions call for a certain level of presentation. First impressions matter, especially when you're joining a family." Daniel had finally spoken up then, his voice firm but respectful. "Mom, Emma looks beautiful in whatever she chooses to wear. This is our wedding, and we wanted to reflect who we are." But Emma could see the doubt in Margaret's eyes. The way she looked at Emma like she was a mistake Daniel would eventually recognize. It made Emma second-guess herself during quiet moments, wondering if maybe she really wasn't good enough for the man she loved. The morning of their wedding, Emma woke up in her apartment with nervous excitement fluttering in her stomach. Her best friend Sarah, who worked at the pharmacy downstairs, had come early to help with hair and makeup. They'd transformed Emma's small bedroom into a makeshift bridal suite, with borrowed mirrors and flowers from the community garden. Emma felt beautiful in her consignment shop dress, her grandmother's necklace resting against her throat, and the simple makeup that Sarah had skillfully applied. For the first time in weeks, Margaret's disapproving comments felt irrelevant. This was Emma's day, and she was marrying the man she loved. The ceremony at the chapel was everything Emma had dreamed of. Daniel waited for her at the altar in a simple black suit, his face lighting up with pure joy when he saw her walking down the aisle. Their vows, which they had written themselves, brought tears to eyes throughout the small gathering. "Emma," Daniel had said, his voice steady and sure, "you've shown me that love isn't about what you have, but who you choose to build a life with. You've made me better simply by believing in me." When Emma spoke her vows, she could barely get through them without crying. "Daniel, you see possibility where I see obstacles, and you've taught me that I'm worthy of love exactly as I am." The reception at the community center was modest but joyful. Emma's co-workers from Pete's Grocery had decorated with simple flowers and string lights, creating a warm atmosphere that felt like home. Daniel couldn't stop smiling as they had their first dance to a song they'd chosen because it was playing the first time they'd kissed. Everything was perfect until Margaret stood up during the toasts. Emma had been expecting the usual mother of the groom speech about gaining a daughter and welcoming her to the family. Instead, Margaret's words cut through the celebratory atmosphere like ice. "I suppose I should say something about today," Margaret began, her voice carrying clearly across the silent room. "My son has always been independent in his choices. Today, he's chosen to marry a grocery clerk." The way she said Emma's profession made it sound shameful. Emma felt her stomach drop as Margaret continued. "Someone with no education, no family connections, no real prospects for advancement." Each word hit Emma like a physical blow. "I just think," Margaret said during a family dinner the month before the wedding, "that some occasions call for a certain level of presentation. First impressions matter, especially when you're joining a family." Daniel had finally spoken up then, his voice firm but respectful. "Mom, Emma looks beautiful in whatever she chooses to wear. This is our wedding, and we want it to reflect who we are." But Emma could see the doubt in Margaret's eyes. The way she looked at Emma like she was a mistake Daniel would eventually recognize. It made Emma second-guess herself during quiet moments, wondering if maybe she really wasn't good enough for the man she loved. The two drowned one evening they'd created suddenly felt like a facade, and Emma was the fraud at the center of it all. Her hands shook as she set down her champagne glass. Sarah immediately moved to her side, arms sliding around her waist in support, but the damage was done. Some of Daniel's relatives were nodding in agreement with Margaret's assessment, making Emma feel even more exposed and humiliated. The worst part was Daniel's initial silence. Her new husband sat frozen at the head table, his face pale with shock. She could see the conflict in his expression, but his lack of immediate response felt like abandonment. Maybe, a terrible voice whispered in her head, he was realizing his mother was right. Tears started streaming down Emma's face despite her desperate attempts to hold them back. Her carefully applied makeup began to run, adding to her humiliation. The entire room seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. "Excuse me," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible over the uncomfortable silence. She stood up quickly, her wedding dress rustling, as she practically ran toward the exit leading behind the reception, the shocked guests, and the husband who hadn't said a word to defend her. Outside the community center, Emma collapsed onto the steps, sobbing as the weight of Margaret's public humiliation crashed over her. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, and instead she felt smaller and more worthless than ever before. The ring on her finger, which had felt so right just hours earlier, now felt like a beautiful lie. What hurt most wasn't just Margaret's cruelty, but the seed of doubt it planted. Maybe Emma really wasn't good enough for Daniel. Maybe she had been fooling herself thinking that love could bridge the gap between what she was and what her family expected. As she sat on those steps in her wedding dress, Emma wondered if the fairy tale was over before it had really begun. Emma sat on the community center steps, her wedding dress pooling around her as tears streaked down her face. The muffled sounds of uncomfortable conversation drifted through the doors behind her, but she couldn't bring herself to go back inside. Margaret's words echoed in her mind, each cruel syllable reinforcing every insecurity Emma had ever felt about not being good enough. The door opened behind her, and Emma expected to see Sarah coming to comfort her. Instead, she heard Daniel's voice, stronger and more commanding than she had ever heard it before. "Everyone, please take your seats.
I need to address what just happened." Emma turned to see Daniel standing in the doorway, his posture different somehow. Gone was the easygoing construction worker she'd fallen in love with. In his place stood someone who looked accustomed to being obeyed, someone with an authority that seemed to fill the entire room. "My wife, Emma, is the most genuine, hardworking, and compassionate person I've ever known," Daniel continued, his voice carrying clearly across the reception hall. "She fell in love with a man she believed worked construction, lived modestly, and had simple dreams. Every single moment of our relationship has been built on authentic love, not material considerations." Emma wiped her eyes and moved closer to the door, curiosity overcoming her hurt. There was something in Daniel's tone that she'd never heard before. "So before anyone else decides to judge my wife's worth based on her paycheck, maybe you should examine what true character actually looks like." Emma could have chosen security over love, status over authenticity. Instead, she chose me for who I am, not what I have. Daniel pulled out his phone, and Emma watched through the doorway as he dialed a number. "Michael, it's Daniel. I need you to prepare the helicopter for departure in 2 hours. Yes, we're still taking the honeymoon trip to Italy as planned." The room erupted in confused whispers. Emma's heart pounded as she tried to process what she was hearing. Helicopter? Italy? These weren't things the Daniel she knew could afford. "Also," Daniel continued into the phone, "transfer $5 million to the Millbrook Children's Hospital Foundation immediately, from the primary account. And Michael, send the legal team to deal with that harassment case we discussed. I want it resolved by Monday." Margaret's face had gone completely white. Several of Daniel's relatives were staring with their mouths open, clearly as shocked as Emma felt. The confident woman who had been so cruel just minutes earlier now looked like she was about to faint. "Daniel," Margaret stammered, "what are you talking about? What legal team? What account?" Daniel looked at his mother with disappointment rather than anger. "I'm talking about the truth, Mom. The truth I've been keeping because I wanted Emma to love me for who I am, not what I own." He walked over to where Emma stood frozen in the doorway and took her hands gently. "Emma, I haven't been completely honest with you about my background. Yes, I work construction because I genuinely love building things with my hands, but that's not my primary occupation." Emma's voice came out as barely a whisper. "What do you mean?" "My full name is Daniel Eduardo Martinez Delacroix. My family owns Delacroix Industries. We have manufacturing plants, real estate holdings, and technology investments across 3 states." Emma felt like the ground was shifting beneath her feet. Delacroix Industries was a name she recognized from business news, from buildings downtown, from charitable foundation announcements. It was one of the largest privately held companies in the region. "The construction work is real," Daniel continued, his voice gentle as he saw the shock in Emma's eyes. "I started learning the trade in high school because I wanted to understand our business from the ground up. When I moved to Millbrook to help Abuema, I kept working construction because it kept me grounded, kept me connected to real work and real people." The transformation in the room was immediate and almost comical. Margaret, who had been so confident in her cruelty minutes earlier, now looked like she was about to faint. "Daniel, sweetheart, I had no idea. If you had just explained—" "Explained what, Mom?" Daniel's voice cut through her stammering. "That my wife deserved basic human respect? That her worth isn't determined by her bank balance or her family's social status?" He turned to address the entire room, his presence commanding attention in a way Emma had never seen before. "Emma has been working 2 jobs to save money for our future. She insisted on paying for her own wedding dress. She's never asked me for anything except love and honesty. The irony is that I'm the one who's been dishonest, hiding my background because I was afraid it would change how she saw me." One of Daniel's cousins, who had been nodding along with Margaret's earlier speech, now approached with a forced smile. "Emma, dear, I think there might have been some misunderstanding." "The only misunderstanding," Daniel interrupted coldly, "was that any of you had the right to judge the woman I love based on her profession or her bank account." Daniel's phone buzzed, and he answered it immediately. "Yes, Michael? Perfect. Have the legal documents ready for signature. Mrs. Martinez Delacroix will be reviewing the foundation paperwork tonight." Emma's head spun at hearing herself referred to by a hyphenated name that included one of the most powerful business families in the state. Daniel noticed her confusion and squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Emma, I know this is a lot to process. I wanted to tell you so many times, but I was terrified it would change everything between us. You loved me when you thought I was just a construction worker living with my grandmother. That kind of love is rare, and I didn't want to risk losing it." Margaret made one desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Daniel, surely you understand that I was just trying to protect the family interests." "No, Mom, you were protecting your own prejudices by publicly humiliating the most important person in my life. There's a difference between protection and cruelty."
Daniel's phone rang again, and this time he put it on speaker. The voice that came through was crisp and professional. "Mr. Martinez Delacroix, this is Patricia Chen from Chen Williams & Associates. I have the injunction paperwork ready regarding the harassment case. Should we proceed with filing?" "Yes, Patricia, file everything we discussed, and prepare a defamation case as well. I want anyone who publicly humiliated my wife today to understand there are consequences for that behavior." The legal implications of Daniel's words hit the room like a thunderbolt. Several relatives who had been smirking during Margaret's speech now looked genuinely frightened. Margaret herself had gone from pale to ashen. "Daniel, please," Margaret pleaded. "I didn't mean any real harm. It was just family concern." "Family concern doesn't involve publicly calling someone worthless trash at their own wedding," Daniel replied. "And it certainly doesn't involve trying to humiliate someone who's never done anything but show kindness to everyone she meets." He turned back to Emma, his voice becoming gentle again. "I know you must have questions. I know this changes things. But I need you to know that everything I told you about my feelings, about why I love you, about the life I want to build with you, all of that was completely true." Emma found her voice finally. "The construction work? Helping your grandmother? Shopping at Pete's Grocery? Was any of that real?" "All of it was real. Abuela really did need help, and I really was terrible at grocery shopping when I first moved to town. I took the construction job because I wanted to keep working with my hands, and I shopped at Pete's because it was close to Abuela's house. Meeting you there was the best accident of my life." Daniel's phone buzzed with a text message, and he glanced at it quickly. "The helicopter will be here in an hour. Emma, I know this is overwhelming, but I want to take you away from all this. We can go to Italy as planned or anywhere else you want. You need time to process this, and you deserve to do it without people staring at you." The mention of their honeymoon trip brought Emma back to reality. Just hours ago, they had been planning a modest trip to a bed and breakfast in the mountains. Now, Daniel was talking about helicopters in Italy like they were everyday occurrences. "I don't understand," Emma said quietly. "If you have all this money, all this power, why didn't you tell me? Did you think I would only love you for your wealth?" "The opposite," Daniel replied immediately. "I was afraid you might not believe my feelings were genuine if you knew about the money.
I'd had relationships before where I was never sure if someone loved me or loved what I could provide. With you, I knew from the first day that your feelings were real. Margaret, still desperate to repair the damage she'd caused, spoke up again. Emma, dear, I hope you can forgive a mother's concern. Of course, now that I understand the situation better, now that you understand Daniel has money, you mean? Your concern wasn't about his happiness. It was about your own social status and what you thought I could or couldn't bring to your family. The power dynamic in the room had completely shifted. Emma realized that she was no longer the poor grocery clerk being judged by her wealthy in-laws. She was married to one of the most influential men in the region, and that came with its own kind of power. Daniel's legal team representative spoke up from the phone again. Mr. Martinez Delacroix, we have documentation of everything that was said tonight. Several guests recorded the speeches. We have a strong case for intentional infliction of emotional distress if you want to proceed. Emma looked at Daniel with surprise. You had your legal team listening? I've been worried about tonight for weeks. I know my family, and I was afraid something like this might happen. I wanted to be prepared to protect you if they tried to hurt you. The helicopter they could hear approaching in the distance put an end to the awkward family confrontation. Daniel took Emma's hand and led her toward the exit, but not before addressing his mother one final time. Mom, I love you, but what you did tonight was unforgivable. Emma is my wife, and she will be treated with respect by every member of this family. If that's not possible, then you won't be part of our lives going forward. As they walked out of the community center toward the landing helicopter, Emma felt like she was in a dream. The man she'd married was the same gentle, funny person she'd fallen in love with, but he was also someone with resources and influence she'd never imagined. Are you okay with all this? Daniel asked as they approached the helicopter, having to raise his voice over the rotor noise. Emma looked back at the community center, where guests were still standing in the doorway staring at them in shock. Then she looked at Daniel, her husband, the man who had just moved heaven and earth to defend her honor. I'm okay, she said, and realized she meant it. I'm married to the man I love, and it turns out he has the power to make sure no one can hurt me like that again. I think I can live with that. As the helicopter lifted off, carrying them away from Millbrook toward their new life together, Emma felt like she was in a dream. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.